Welcome, everybody, to the usual Friday show I do at 7. I don't have really a whole lot to go over as of right now, although there's a lot of things going on in the world. I'd read a segment of my story earlier, pretty long segment, too. Um, so I'm going to make this relatively short. I made a post last night on Community, which actually addressed one of the topics I had planned to bring up on the show, pertaining to the loony, like absolutely psychotic, just these different narratives that you see anymore on mainstream media rags and everything. It's getting really bizarre. But they do, and I'm talking about the propagandists that work in MSM, they do exactly what they feel that they can get away with on a large scale. And by that, I mean, as far as what they feel, they can hoodwink and deceive the vast majority of people with. So, while I am going to cover some of these narratives here and there. Well, a little bit, I'll just say. A little bit. I'll cover them a little bit. Mostly, what I was going to discuss is specifics as of right now in the story and the purpose of the story, the audiobook. And I'm also going to try to talk to people a little bit more in the chat, but we'll see where that goes. Usually people don't talk very much in my chats, and, I don't blame them. I don't usually shut up long enough to actually look at the chats, but I'm going to go ahead and start by bringing up that narrative that I saw just when I had thought in the last live show, the live show before the two most recent story readings I did, just when I thought that absolutely nothing could top the absurdity of the of the State Department statement about Americans somehow, some way, for whatever reason, being drafted, being conscripted into the Russian army, which is hilarious considering that they're not doing a general conscription. They're calling up reserves. And because reserves live in civilian communities, they can spin that to then say that they're doing a general conscription, which is absolute total bullshit. They're calling up reserves. They have 2 million reserves to call upon. They really have not used anything but 70 different battalions from their active duty army, as well as a few from their paramilitary forces, what they used to call their internal troops, which they now rename National Guard. They really have been rotating a lot of those forces from those specific elements. And now they're calling up reserves because I guess they're about to bring the whole situation there to a close. Now, whether or not it's true that a certain leader signed a document stipulating that they were going to be inducted into NATO or not, whether that's true or not, it was going to come to a close here pretty soon anyway. And that was already set into motion back when Putin went to the summit held in Samarkand in Uzbekistan to consult the different allies of his and other world leaders, specifically China, but also Iran and others, to consult them about the next step in his plan to bring that conflict to a close. Because we all know he fully recognizes that he has to do it at some point. He can't freeze a conflict like that while continuing to have a hostile neighbor right beside them. There's no way you can freeze a conflict like that because there's too many precedents set in place whereby you would continue to have steady attacks coming from that hostile entity next door. So, also because of the ties to NATO, which, of course, to him is unacceptable. Look, I don't care one way or the other. I don't personally, but I'm just merely stating the facts that dictate the direction that that situation goes in. So just when I thought that State Department BS was as bad and as low as it gets for fake media narratives, I happened across an article. I happened across an article that said that Russia, massively more industrialized than this other nation, massively so, with a massively larger military-industrial complex. The article said that Russia was relying upon third world, massively deindustrialized North Korea for artillery and artillery shells. Are you freaking kidding me? Not that North Korea doesn't have its own military industrial complex. That's really about half of its whole economy. But that it's nowhere near as large or as well developed as that of Russia. Nowhere even close. Russia, who sat upon decades worth of stockpiles from the Cold War back in its USSR days, and of course, the 14 other Soviet states that comprised the USSR with Russia, of course, each got their own piece of the stocks, but Russia got left with an enormous stockpile of all sorts of ammunition types, shells, rockets, everything. And then, of course, you had everything that they produced since early mid-90s until now, which were generally the post-Soviet Russian newer generations of weapons. Now, I'm talking specifically about artillery shells right here, right now. I'm talking about that. It is a well-known fact that is one of the single, solitary, most mass-produced types of ammunitions within the USSR. Aside from just bullets now, we're talking about artillery shells in particular, but also tank shells and artillery rockets. But for them to just let loose, since this entire thing began 5 months ago, for them to just let loose 3,600,000 plus shells at averaging roughly 20,000 shells a day. And that's only the howitzer artillery. It's not even talking about the rocket artillery or the different types of missiles they've expended. But just talking about the artillery shells that they've expended. 3,600,000 plus shells at roughly 20,000 per day average, if you were to take the average each day that was fired, adding up to that. So if they were anywhere near harming their overall stockpiles, for one thing, they wouldn't have used so much of it. And for another thing, they'd have not only been more conservative with it, but they would have only used it in specific pinpoint strikes. Typically what American doctrines are is that normally, unless it's a terrain denial mission, which doesn't always occur, but that's the one time where it's usually like a fire at will sort of situation where you could just keep firing shells, but typically Russian doctrines are extremely artillery heavy and reliant. So they have focused a lot of production through decades on artillery shells and pieces, for that matter, that go with the shells that are paired together. But in American doctrines, we use our howitzer artillery for more as a precision strike type of a weapon to be called upon for fire support, basically. You know, rarely, like I said, does it get used for anything beyond simple fire support missions. You know, like we don't mass a whole shit ton of artillery together and just mass fire it all at once. No, we use ours typically where specific batteries get passed down fire missions from other forces in the field who might have come under attack or something from somewhere. And, you know, we normally will fire in support of those forces out in the field. Whereas Russian artillery does a vast majority of fighting. Like it's not only there to be called upon for support missions, but it can also actually be the sole arbiter of an assault itself on its own, meaning that it can launch these massed heavy barrages of artillery shells in massive concentrations. Whereas, you know, we shoot individual missions mostly. We shoot individual missions. Now, if we had to ever get in a conflict with a nation like Russia or China, there's no way in hell that our batteries shooting typically much smaller fire support missions would be able to keep up with the type of mass volley fire barrages that are standard practice in the Chinese, but also Russian militaries, okay? So, you know, I have told you all before, when it comes to artillery shells, just for howitzer artillery, whether the self-propelled or the towed howitzers, the national stockpiles of the UK and France would be totally gone by day number 8 of a full-scale conflict. Day 8. So, also, in 10 days, our nation's entire annual production of artillery shells would have been expended. Not the whole stocks that we have, just what amounts to annual production. So we, of course, with how much of our stocks we've given to that black hole over there, we have given enormous amounts of shells to them, as well as the platforms by which they could use them. So if we in our current state, being cut off by a lot of the raw materials and also even electronic components for some weapons types, if we in our current state of economic decline, and supply chain decline, which affects without a doubt our military industrial complex as much as it's shrunk, if we got into a full-scale conflict after depleting a sizable amount of our stocks, how long would our artillery be able to fight a war against a powerful enemy like Russia or maybe the world superpower, China? How long? How long? Well, honestly, probably 2 months, if that. But the war wouldn't last 2 months. It would be over in days because the fourth generation warfare, also known as hybrid warfare doctrine, has enemy troops inside our borders as well as ringing the outer borders of our nation. The external component that sits outside of our nation that would cross borders and beach land and also parachute in if they're paratroop elements would combine as reinforcements for the Trojan units that are already within our borders. They would combine with also very high-tech new weaponry, as well as plenty of older types of weapons, to carry out the doctrines that are fourth-generation warfare doctrines, meaning the war would be over extremely quickly. Because if enemies begin within your borders, starting extremely close to their objectives, oh yeah, you could absolutely end a war in a matter of days. Because the Trojans would already be doing much of the heavy lifting, already initiating the capture of everything from installations to human settlements, and also infrastructure and key logistical routes, and establishing logistical installations for the externals who are coming in to more or less relieve them or to serve as a heavy-handed reinforcements that are coming inland to fan out and assist the Trojan units that are already deep inland, capturing many areas. That's how hybrid war works, at least in the conquest phase of it. Of course, it has a setup period, which there's 4 steps to it, where the target nation's political classes are bribed and or coerced into weakening the target nation with bad policies, also selling properties, especially ports, whereby foreign enemies can begin to import logistics and troops and their supplies, and also send them to other properties that they would have been purchasing that are strategically purchased throughout the enemy's nation. That's the setup period. So we're basically waiting. We're on phase 3. We're waiting now for them to give the green light to the invasion, which of course, they ideally they would like us to totally collapse and descend into some sort of an internal conflict first, if at all possible. And according to prophecy, not only is that possible, but it's a certainty, because it sure talks about that in Jeremiah. So beyond that, then you have the invasion. Why would they want us to break down first? In my story, I have it happening on a separate timeline whereby we did not have a collapse. We had hard economic times, and we had some problems there, but we did not have a full-blown collapse, nor did we have the internal conflict that followed in the audiobook timeline, which goes with all the other invasion work timeline I did. That's just to show what it would be like if it was a best case for us. I mean an absolute best case for us. Because the worst case is that we're so severely weakened from collapse and infighting that, they have no trouble at all not only taking this place, but holding it, because so many of the very, very few experienced people, the cadre of experienced people we would have all been wiped out by then. So that would make the occupation phase drastically easier, far more simplified than it would be if they just bum rushed in without letting us collapse. But to see the news say, and the mainstream news, not only parrot some bullshit that the State Department said, but also to see them make up a lie and then try to shift the blame by saying, instead of it instead of them saying it was their own psyop spin doctors who made this up and came up with it, no, they tried to shift the blame and say it was a U.S. intelligence agency. They didn't even say agency. They just said U.S. intelligence said that Russia was buying shells and artillery from North Korea. Like, what? Which intelligence said this? What agency said this? Well, there was none given. There was none listed. Why? Because whoever came up with such a bullshit narrative should be embarrassed. Should be extremely embarrassed. That's a complete, total joke. Joke. That's a joke. It's a damn shame. Let me see who's in here. See, I don't have much of a crowd tonight. Hey, what's up, Tommy? Hey, Fear No Man. How you doing, Ken? Yeah, I know, Ken. I'm gonna keep this pretty short. I know I have a lot of competition. I mean, I'm used to it. It's all good. But yeah, I wanted to just talk about some of these goofy narratives and tie that into the story I've been writing or reading, rather, the audio book, and why I'm doing what I'm doing with it. Because there's a lot of misconceptions everywhere, as it relates to what something like a world conflict or even a foreign invasion of Mystery Babylon USA would even look like, or how it would go, and everything else on the actual ground itself, on the ground. And I wanted to show all the aspects of not only what overall to expect, but what fourth generation hybrid warfare looks like I wanted to show that, but also all the aspects of traditional warfare that also go along with that, so that I can hopefully shatter all the misconceptions that people have about war and what it's like, because America is a very, very coddled, very much a Disneyland type of atmosphere. It's never really experienced hardship yet, which is why this nation is going to bear the brunt of all the end times hardship. I'm just going to go ahead and call it like it is, So people here have had it really good for very, very long. But nothing lasts forever. Not even good times. Good times never last forever. And these goofy narratives that the spin doctors come up with, they'll all be proven wrong. Because another thing that's in Jeremiah is that Jeremiah states that all your wise men and counselors will all look like fools. That's a pretty broad stripe, because there's a lot of different classes of people that could fit within that. But the narrative spin doctors of the MSM certainly fit that. They fit that. Because they're the ones that are always saying, oh, experts say, and all these cliche statements. They'll never name who said what, but they'll say things like, experts say, and, intelligence says, like this this narrative about North Korean artillery and stuff going to Russia. What a bunch of bunk nonsense. But yeah, that's the class of people that easily fit within that. That class of people easily fits within that. Easily. And they will all look like fools, because here we are, 5 months plus, really, but 5 months into that conflict over there, and the Russians are still there, still doing the same things they've been doing since the beginning. I mean, it's all about to change. They're about to go full bore on Ukraine, but their limited incursion has been going on for 5 full months. Ukraine hasn't dislodged them. They're not losing in Ukraine. If they were losing, how do you lose 5 full months and not be dislodged from relatively small positions? I mean, it's like, oh wow, Ukraine captures a village here or there, but typically what happens is the Russians withdraw. Ukrainian forces move in, capture empty villages, And then the Russians shell the hell out of them, and then their forces move right back in, like what happened 2 separate times already with the Kharkov area. So that's called maneuver warfare, by the way, and as well as what they did with their humongous feint attack that they did, where they sent very, very small forces to the outskirts of Kiev. I mean, I'm sorry, but, 1 battalion of special operations forces and a regiment of air assault troops is not enough to capture a city the size of Kiev. You need a lot more than 4,000-ish troops to capture a city of that size. I mean, at very bare minimum. I mean, we're talking you would at least need 60,000 plus, 50 to 60,000 plus to capture a city of that size, at least. But 4,000, that wasn't enough to do it. Yeah, sure. They took over a few key nodes around the outskirts of the city. They took over a couple nodes. They held it for a little while, just long enough so that they can move their other forces elsewhere throughout the eastern portions that they were trying to shield from being invaded by the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians actually were allegedly supposed to have invaded the LPR and DPR to bring them back into the fold. But they didn't get to do that because Russia ended up invading first with their limited incursion to shield those two breakaway regions. Now that they just held their referendum, I guess Ukraine, in response to that, allegedly, I don't know how true this is yet. I'll have to look more into this, but allegedly they're signing paperwork to try to be inducted into NATO. I don't know yet all about that. I just seen something about that today, but I'll have to look more into that. I haven't really gotten to look any further into it before I went live, so that's something I'll investigate. But yeah, there's just so many different narratives going on anymore. It's the whole world's just totally a spun place. But yeah, as far as the story, though, where I'm going with that is that while I'm getting into some very dark topics as it relates to things that happen in war, such as atrocities and things like that, there's still going to be certain things that I'm not going to touch altogether as it relates to some of these atrocities, namely the R word. It starts with an R and ends with an E. And it's a sexual trauma. I'm not going to go into the specific instances of it in my story, but I will mention things that sort of point to that's actually happening without having to go into the gory details of that. Now, while I'm content to be fully realistic about the fatalities and, maimings and things like that, that's just some things I won't touch. So I'm making it known now that I'm not going to go into the gory details of the actual specific R-related events themselves as they happen. I'm going to just talk about things that allude that they're going on, but not specifics about anything like that. I'll allude to it, but that's about as far as I'll go, because that is a real atrocity, and it does happen very often in wars, especially in wars where despotic regimes are invading other nations. So that's unfortunately a very real fixture in a lot of wars. But the purpose of the story to begin with is to be as realistic and authentic as possible, to make people fully aware of what types of things go along with that. And atrocities, unfortunately, are part of war. They're parts of war. But like I said, that's the one specific type of atrocity I'm not going to go in very great detail on, but I'm simply going to allude that it happens, but I'm not going to mention specific acts of it. So I'm going to spare the audience from that. But I am going to continue to talk about fatalities and maiming because it's a regular everyday part of war. I mean, that's what war is, you know? I mean, but I think that's important for people that want the truth, because to know about these things and to be forewarned of these things is to be able to more adequately prepare for those things. And part of that is very mental. It's very mental. I think if people can snap out of their blase Disneyland coddled existence then and begin to accept reality, then they can make more realistic planning for emergency preparedness, shit hit the fan, World War III, foreign invasion, whatever you want to call it, planning as it relates to such events. So that's why I do what I do on this channel. I'm very serious about what I do on this channel, while also even relating the physical occurrences to Bible prophecy while I do it, to show people that the physical things in the world we see right now very much back up what the Bible says, and the Bible is not wrong at all, because there's a lot of people who deny the Word of God. For whatever reason, they want to deny that the Word of God is real. And I don't know why people do that, but it is very real. And all the physical realities all around us that are going on back it up to the hilt, 100%. And I feel like my job as a true believer in Yeshua Messiah is to show people just how real it is, with all the physical facts that corroborate everything that those prophecies say. And I think I've done a pretty decent job with that. I really do. But that's really all I wanted to come on here and discuss tonight, because after reading my story earlier, I really, and posting that post last night about these bunk media narratives, I really don't have a whole lot to say tonight. And there's so many people that are already taking care of so many things. There's really, I mean, what else is left to be said about it? I'm not going to talk about weather things, because it's not really like my area of expertise or really even knowledge here. I don't really talk about earthquakes, weather stuff. I mean, it's not really my place to. So I stick with what I'm good at, what I excel at, and I really try to avoid things that I either have extremely limited knowledge on or don't have any at all on. So for the people that are down there in the Gulf, in Florida, or wherever else, whatever all places this is affected, my condolences are with you. May Yeshua Messiah bless and keep you always. For those who have lost places or relatives, my condolences. I mean, I wish you the best. I really do. May Yeshua bless and keep each and every one of you. I really mean that. I don't know what else to say. I mean, but that's all I can say as it relates to the weather stuff. But, thanks to everybody that is always here. It's always listening. My content is extremely shadow banned. And it really doesn't get shared out all that much, but that's fine. That's fine. That's all good. I'm going to finish my story probably relatively soon. Might be a few more live shows in between. But I'm going to try to... I wanted to have the story go on a bit longer, but I think I'm going to cut it a little shorter just so I can be done on YouTube soon, because I'm basically at the point where I'm like, my motivation to really upload content is really getting low. So I'm really getting close to the point where I mean, I've basically done and said everything that needed to be. So it's coming to a point where, yeah, if somebody wants me to jump on a live with them, I'll do that, but I'm not going to upload any more content because, quite frankly, I mean, there's enough content on just my channel, and nearly all of it is extremely timeless stuff, meaning that it's applicable yesterday, today, and it will be tomorrow because it's it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened just yet. As far as like the internal conflict and the foreign invasion, that hasn't happened yet. So it's going to be applicable for quite some time. That's all my live shows, whether they're the miscellaneous shows in the miscellaneous show playlist, whether they're my Friday shows, whatever, short videos, long videos, documentaries, they're all in the playlists, minus all the shorter stuff from a while back, but all the long stuff is in their own playlists of all my content. There's enough stuff there to keep people busy probably for 2 straight months. If you were to listen to everything that's on this channel, there's probably enough content on this whole channel combined to keep you busy for a few good months. But I'm going to wrap my story up soon. Maybe do a few more interspaced Friday shows, and then do a finale show, and that'll be it. Well, that'll be it for tonight. I really didn't have a whole lot, so may Yeshua Messiah bless all of you and keep you. I'm going to say goodbye here for the night. See who's all in here. Yeah, you're right, Blue Eyes. I really have. There's over like what now, 480 or something like that. I don't know how many. It's like 4 something. There's like a lot of videos on this channel now, and a lot of it is very, very still very much applicable. People can really watch a lot of it. Yeah, exactly, Tommy. If Russia did need anybody's help in terms of like weaponry, they could just get it from China. They don't need to get it from anybody else, especially not no third world nation that doesn't even have the industrial output of military equipment that Russia even has, like North Korea. They'd get it from a nation that produces more than even they do, like China. It's really goofy. There's some really goofy, nonsensical narratives going on out there. Hey, all smiles. Great to see you. Well, you all have a very, very blessed night.